You have a month to find a new place. My mother said it so casually that for a second I thought I had heard her wrong. We were still sitting at the dinner table when she slid a folder beside my plate. We sold the house, she added. You're out. I looked at my father. He immediately lowered his eyes. That told me everything. You sold it, I asked. When? Mom folded her hands. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. I live here. You stay here, she corrected. There's a difference. That hurt more than I expected. For 4 years, I had paid utility bills when Dad's work hours were cut. I had covered property taxes twice when they fell short. When the roof leaked, I put thousands into the repair. When the furnace died in January, I helped replace it. But apparently none of that counted now. Were you planning this while I was still giving you money for the house? Dad shifted in his chair. Mom didn't. It's our property, Maya. Then she leaned back and said the sentence I would remember for a long time. Paying some bills doesn't make you an owner. I stared at her, then at the folder beside my plate. Instead of arguing, I pulled it toward me. Give me the realtor's number. Mom blinked. Why? If I have 30 days, I need to know exactly when the buyers expect possession. Her expression softened into something almost satisfied. She thought I had accepted defeat. 3 days later, my parents moved into their new condo. The dining table disappeared first, then the bedroom furniture, then boxes of things Mom had already decided mattered more than anything I wanted to keep. By Friday evening, I was standing alone in the living room surrounded by half-packed boxes and pale rectangles on the walls where family photographs had once hung. I had 26 days left. Or at least, that was what I believed. The following Monday, my phone rang while I was at work. Hi, Maya. This is Karen, the realtor handling your parents' property. My stomach tightened. Is something wrong? There was a pause. The buyer's financing fell through. I sat straighter. Karen continued. Your parents still want the house sold quickly. They've already committed to the condo, so we're trying to find another qualified buyer without losing too much time. I looked around my office, then pictured the house. The roof I had helped repair. The furnace I had helped replace. The kitchen where my mother had told me I meant nothing to the property because my name wasn't on it. Karen, I said slowly, what happens if another buyer can close quickly? That would solve most of the problem. I went silent. Then I asked the question that changed everything. What would it take for me to buy it? Karen didn't answer right away. You mean buy the house yourself? Yes. There was another pause, longer this time. Then her voice changed from surprised to professional. Do you have financing lined up? I have a mortgage pre-approval. That caught her attention. The truth was, I had been saving for years. Not because I expected to buy my parents' house, but because I was tired of living as though my entire future depended on whether someone else decided I was welcome. Karen asked me to meet her the next afternoon. When I arrived at her office, she had the listing documents spread across a conference table. That was when I saw something that made my jaw tighten. New furnace, Karen read. Roof repairs, electrical panel upgrade. I looked at her. Mom told you they paid for those. She said they had invested significantly in the property. I almost laughed. I had paid part of the furnace bill myself. I had transferred money directly to the roofing company. And when the electrical panel needed replacing, my mother had told me, we all live here. Everyone should contribute. Karen must have noticed my expression. There's something else, she said carefully. What? When I first came to inspect the property, your mother described you as her adult daughter who was temporarily staying at home. That sentence landed harder than the others. Temporarily staying. For years, my paycheck had helped keep the lights on. But when it came time to sell, I had become a guest. I pushed the paperwork back toward her. Okay. Karen frowned slightly. Okay. I'm not calling Mom. I'm not arguing with her. I want to make an offer. She studied me for a second. Then we treat you exactly like any other buyer. That's what I want. I showed her my pre-approval letter, savings statements, employment records, and proof that I had enough for the down payment and closing costs. Karen checked everything twice. Finally, she said, "You're qualified." My pulse kicked. How fast can this happen? If your lender moves quickly and your parents accept the offer, we can keep the closing timeline fairly tight. Send it. I didn't ask for a discount. I didn't ask Karen to tell them it was me. I offered a fair price and let the paperwork speak for itself. 2 days later, Karen called. They accepted. I sat completely still. They did. Your mother wanted confirmation that the replacement buyer had strong financing. Once she got that, she signed. That evening, Mom called me. So, she said, have you found somewhere yet? I looked at the purchase agreement sitting on my desk. I'm handling it. Well, don't leave it until the last minute. The new buyer won't care about excuses. I know. She sounded almost pleased. Good. 3 days later, I sat across from a closing attorney with a pen in my hand. Page after page passed in front of me. Loan documents, insurance forms, property disclosures. Then finally, the purchase agreement. My eyes stopped at one line. Buyer, Maya BNNTT. I picked up the pen and signed. Closing changed everything, even though almost nobody knew it. My parents received the sale proceeds they had agreed to. The mortgage, insurance, taxes, utilities, and responsibility for the house became mine. And the boxes stacked along the hallway. I unpacked them. For the first time in weeks, I put my clothes back into the closet. I returned my books to the shelves and changed every utility account into my name. I wasn't waiting to be removed anymore. I was home. A few weeks later, I went to my cousin's birthday dinner. Mom and Dad were already there. I had barely put down my bag when Aunt Denise walked over. Maya, I've been meaning to ask, where did you end up moving? I glanced toward Mom. She was listening. Moving. You know, after the house sold. Before I could answer, Mom laughed from across the table. Oh, Maya always lands somewhere. Several people turned toward her. Mom continued. Getting her to become independent has always been the challenge. I felt my fingers tight around the back of the chair. She had thrown me out. Now she was making it sound like she had spent years carrying me. I could have ended it right there. I could have said, actually, Mom, I bought your house. Instead, I looked at Aunt Denise. I found somewhere that works for me. Mom smiled as though I had confirmed everything she had said. Later, while people were cutting the birthday cake, Aunt Denise pulled me aside. If rent is tight, you can tell me. Why would you think it is? Her expression changed. Your mother said supporting you all these years delayed their retirement. I stared at her. She said that. Denise immediately looked uncomfortable. Maya, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. But I was glad she had. Because now, I understood the story Mom had been telling everyone. The roof I helped repair didn't exist in her version. Neither did the furnace. The taxes. The utility payments. She hadn't just erased my contributions from the sale. She had turned me into the burden. I could have pulled out my phone and shown Denise years of transfers and receipts. I didn't. Not yet. I'm okay, I told her. And I meant it. Over the next several months, I quietly repaired the house. I handled the mortgage myself and stopped discussing my finances with my parents. Mom never visited the old neighborhood. As far as she knew, somebody else owned the place. Almost 6 months after that dinner, I took a photo outside the house and posted it online without thinking much about it. The front porch was clearly visible behind me. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrated. Mom. Her message was written entirely in capital letters. I actually laughed when I read Mom's message. Not because anything was funny, because after 6 months, she genuinely had no idea. Before I could answer, another message appeared. Maya, THAT house BLONGS to someone else. Then another. Did you refuse to move out? I stared at the screen. Mom thought I was trespassing, or somehow still hiding inside a house she believed belonged to a stranger. I could have typed a long explanation. Instead, I walked into my office and opened the drawer where I kept the closing documents. Inside was a photograph Karen had taken on closing day. I was standing on the front porch, holding the folder containing the paperwork that had transferred ownership to me. I turned the photograph over, picked up a pen, and wrote 2 words. I bought. I photographed both sides and sent them to Mom. For almost a minute, nothing happened. Then my phone rang. Mom. I let it ring. Seconds later, Dad called. I ignored that too. Mom called again. Then the messages started. What does this mean? You bought what? Call me immediately. Finally came the one I expected. You couldn't afford that house. I answered with a single message. The purchase was financed, closed legally, and recorded. My phone rang again. This time I silenced it. Mom wasn't satisfied with my answer. She called Karen. From what I later learned, she went into that conversation convinced there had been some kind of deception. Karen simply explained what the paperwork already showed. The original buyers lost their financing. A qualified replacement buyer submitted an offer. Mom and Dad accepted it. The financing was approved. The sale closed. Every document had been signed properly. There was nothing to reverse. The buyer just happened to be the daughter they had given 30 days to leave. Mom's calls became more frantic after that, because the house wasn't the only thing she had lost control of. For 6 months, she had been telling relatives that I had struggled to survive without my parents supporting me. Now she had to explain how that supposedly dependent daughter had qualified to purchase the property she claimed I couldn't even afford to live in. By 10 that night, I had messages from Dad asking me to please talk this through. Mom kept calling. I put my phone face down and made tea. When I checked again near midnight, the screen showed. *49, MISSED calls. I reached for the power button. Before I could switch the phone off, it rang again. This time, the name on the screen wasn't Mom. It was Aunt Denise. I answered. Maya. Her voice sounded strange. Yes. There was a brief silence. Then she said, Your mother just told us what happened. What exactly did she tell you? I asked. Aunt Denise hesitated. That you somehow bought the house after they sold it. I leaned against the kitchen counter. There's no somehow about it. So for the first time, I told her exactly what happened. Mom and Dad had sold the house without telling me beforehand and given me 30 days to leave. Their original buyer's financing had fallen through after my parents had already committed financially to their condo. Karen needed another qualified buyer. I already had savings. I had stable employment, good credit, and a mortgage pre-approval. So I made an offer. No secret inheritance. No fake paperwork. No loophole. I bought the house through the same legal process any other qualified buyer would have used. They didn't know it was you, Denise asked. They were focused on getting the sale completed. Mom wanted confirmation that the replacement buyer had solid financing. She got it and accepted the offer. Denise went quiet. Then she asked the question that mattered. Maya, why didn't you tell anyone? I thought about the birthday dinner. About Mom laughing while telling everyone I struggled to become independent. Because I wasn't interested in humiliating her, I said. I just wanted my home. The next morning, Mom called again. This time I answered. Maya, what were you thinking? Not hello. Not congratulations. Not even an apology. What do you mean? You deliberately hid this from us. I submitted an offer. You accepted it. You knew we didn't realize the buyer was you. And you never asked. Dad's voice came faintly through the background. Linda, calm down. Mom ignored him. That house has been in this family for years. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. You sold it. That isn't the point. It is exactly the point. Her voice sharpened. You should have told us. I looked across my kitchen at the wall where the old family calendar used to hang. Then I remembered that Sunday dinner. Mom, do you remember what you told me when I asked whether everything I'd paid toward this house mattered? Silence. I continued. You said paying some bills didn't make me an owner. Dad said nothing. Mom said nothing. You were right, I told her. Paying your bills didn't make me the owner. Buying the house did. The line went completely silent. Finally, Dad exhaled. Mom recovered first. Well, regardless, this should remain family property. I stared at the phone. It stopped being family property when you gave your daughter 30 days to get out of it. Maya. No, you sold it. You received the money you agreed to receive. I bought it. That's the end of the transaction. Then came the request I hadn't expected. Mom said, what if your father and I decide condo living isn't for us? What about it? We should at least have the option to buy the house back. No. One word. Nothing else. Maya, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm keeping the house I legally purchased. She tried arguing again, but there was nothing left to negotiate. There was no legal dispute to threaten me with. The sale had been valid. The money had been paid. The property was mine. But the financial consequences weren't what bothered Mom most. The family knew now. A few days later, Denise called again. Apparently relatives had begun questioning Mom's story that she and Dad had financially supported me for years. This time, I didn't protect that story. When someone asked directly, I showed the records. The roofing payment. My share of the furnace replacement. Utility transfers. The property tax payments I had covered when Dad's reduced hours left them short. I didn't post anything publicly. I didn't send some dramatic family-wide message. I simply stopped lying by omission to make my parents look better. The reactions changed quickly. People who had thought I was living comfortably at my parents' expense realized I had been helping keep the household running. Mom hated that. For years, she had controlled the story. Now the receipts did. A few weeks later, I changed the locks. Not because I expected Mom to show up. Because those old keys represented something I no longer wanted. For years, Mom had been able to remind me that the roof over my head belonged to her. Now she had no key. No financial claim. No authority to decide whether I stayed. Dad eventually called me without Mom. I should have told you about the sale, he said. Yes. I thought avoiding the argument would make things easier. For you, maybe. He didn't fight me on that. Our relationship became distant, but civil after that conversation. Mom remained angry for months. She seemed to believe that my greatest offense was refusing to apologize for buying something she willingly sold. I stopped trying to convince her otherwise. Instead, I changed the house. Dad's unused office became my workspace. I repaired one room at a time and kept enough money in savings that I would never again be trapped because somebody else controlled where I lived. The mortgage came out of my account every month. So did the insurance, the taxes, the repairs. And strangely, those bills felt different now. They weren't payments toward somebody else's leverage over me. They were mine. Sometimes I still thought about that dinner. Mom sliding the folder toward me. Dad staring at his plate. 30 days. You're out. At the time, I thought losing that house meant losing my security. Instead, it forced me to stop confusing family loyalty with surrendering control over my own life. 6 months earlier, Mom had decided whether I was allowed to stay. Now I stood inside my own front doorway with my own key in my hand. Linda gave me 1 month to get out of the house, but 6 months later, she finally understood that the daughter she tried to evict was the only person who had earned the right to call it home.